As it was expected, good morning, evening and afternoon everyone, yesterday was the day of the reveal of the Dragonflight talents for Monk. Just by looking at the datamine talents, Monk was the one to have way more than Demon Hunter, so it is indeed confirmed that Demon Hunter, the last of the new classes released in Legion, is also going to be the last of the classes now to have its Dragonflight talents being revealed to everyone. So let's talk about Monk. Monk has quite a few very cool things. You know, many people were being a little bit too, perhaps, defeatist, a little bit too depressed about the state of Monk, the state of the talents of Monk in Dragonflight, but they are actually quite nice. They're actually quite cool. Perhaps it has something to do with being a hybrid, a triple spec hybrid, which means you have tons of things that can be taken away or lent to the other specs in your class. In particular, the general tree, you get to have a lot of things that perhaps only Brewmaster used to have, or only Windwalker used to have, or only Mistweaver used to have. So the overall look is very nice. Now it will be something to see if it actually turns out to be a very good setup for your spec. But when you start by looking at the general tree, there are a few things that immediately jump at your eye when you look at the Monk. Number one, the newest of changes is that you now have way more options for defensives, way more options to stay alive, because you are given both Diffuse Magic and Dampen Harm at the same time. To make this even easier to realize, here's the current talent calculator of Monk. You can see that Healing Elixir, Diffuse Magic and Dampen Harm are in the same talent row. Now you have Diffuse Magic and you have Dampen Harm that you can pick at the same time. Not to mention that Healing Elixir is also going to be available for Brewmaster, and Healing Elixir is also going to be available for Mistweaver. Fuck Windwalker, apparently. No Healing Elixir for them. So now you have way more options for your own self-preservation in terms of defensives. Another interesting part of the Monk setup is that you don't get any Covenant abilities in the general tree, but you get plenty in your specific tree, because Brewmaster is going to get Bone Dust Brew and Weapons of Order, so Necro and Kyrian. Mistweaver is going to get Feline Stomp and Bone Dust Brew, so Nightfey and Necro, and then Windwalker is going to get Bone Dust Brew and Feline Stomp as well. So you have double choice of Covenants in your specific trees, but no choice of Covenants in the general tree. Another very cool thing for Monk is that back in your current state, you had to choose between Celerity, Chi Torpedo and Tiger's Lust as your mobility options. Now you have Tiger's Lust as pretty much a baseline ability that you will always pick when you start. And then you still have your options between Celerity and Chi Torpedo. So now your mobility gets just a free extra addition to your mobility choices. Of the last row, which is usually when you can expect some juicy special things for Monk, honestly, there isn't much. Perhaps the strongest one is going to be the Under Construction talent that we will see soon, but this side, which is supposed to be the Mistweaver side, is supposed to be the healing side, because you get Vivify buffs, you get Soothing Mist, you get the choice between Chi Wave and Chi Burst, more roll buffs, Leech, and then you have, when your healing spells heal more than 3 people below 35% HP, heal for an additional $S1%, and the last one is the Summon Jade Serpent Statue, which is a staple of Mistweaver. And then on the opposite side, you have the tanky stuff with Fortifying Brew, with Expel Harm, with extra avoidance, with damage reduction when a single hit takes more than 20% of your HP, which leads to Summon Blackhawk Statue. So this side is Mistweaver, this side is Brewmaster, side in the middle was supposed to be Windwalker, but it really isn't Windwalker. You have, I guess, Fast Feet to increase the damage of Rising Sun Kick, which will be a must for Windwalker, and you have your current passive movement speed of Monk, and the 3 consecutive abilities hit more than 3 enemies, deal additional damage. So this one is going to be the Windwalker specific ability, yet we don't really know which is going to be. The general tree is fine. There is nothing really too surprising about it. As I said, the biggest wins for Monk in this general tree is the mobility being a little bit better in choices, and the defensives being a little bit better choices. The rest is very straightforward. Mistweaver, Brewmaster, Windwalker. So not too surprising. Then you go into the specific trees. The specific trees, the bigger one, the one that looks the best overall, is perhaps Brewmaster, mostly because Brewmaster already looks quite nice right now in Shadowlands, essentially. When looking at this tree, I was previously complimenting Protection Paladin for having so many abilities to reduce the damage, for damage reduction, for extra block, and for smoothing out your damage intake as a tank. When looking at Brewmaster, perhaps they one-up the situation of Prot Paladin. They get even tankier by several of these talent options. You have pretty much all of the staples of the current Brewmaster that you have taken as talents since forever. Things like Bob and Weave that you can pick again, things like High Tolerance that you can pick again. You go back to take your Celestial Brew and the buff, the second rank of Celestial Brew, the one that increases the absorption shield of Celestial Brew by 200% based on the stagger that you have purified, which makes it very, very strong. You can take your extra charges of Purifying Brew. You can go here to Purifying Brew, instantly healing 25% of your purified stagger damage, which could be super good when you are in the red. Or the other one, Expel Harm, healing is increased by up to 200% on your missing health, which makes it actually a legitimately good healing ability. For Monk, we have already mentioned the fact that now you also get a healing elixir for free. Other further buffs like light brewing to reduce the cooldown of your brews. We already talked about the covenants available for you, Bomb Dust Brew and Weapons of Order. Weapons of Order leads directly to choosing either Call to Arms or, interestingly enough, the Mechanicus passive ability, which makes it into the Monk tree, Effusive Anima Accelerator to reduce the cooldown of Weapons of Order. Meanwhile, the choice of Bondust Brew is going to be Bountiful Brew, of course, legendary for Necro, or Attenuation, which I believe is the conduit for Bondust Brew. There are a few other options here and there, like for example, you can take Special Delivery or Rushing Jadewind. You can, interestingly enough, when you go down this road, you can take your Exploding Keg ability to make the enemies miss their attacks for 3 seconds, their melee attacks for 3 seconds. When you go and take Walk with the Ox, which is something you already have, paired together with Invoke Nuzao passive, the Purifying Stagger damage while Nuzao is active is going to empower his Stomp, which is actually going to amount to quite a good amount of damage. You can finish off with your current strongest legendary, perhaps one of the few specs that had one stronger legendary by a giant mile for the entire expansion, which is Brewmaster for Stormstout Last Keg. The entire tree feels very, very nice. You also have a Breath of Fire with the passive of Salsalabim Strength, which is one of the new ones. When you use Keg Smash, the remaining cooldown of Breath of Fire is reset, which can net for even more damage, followed by Charred Passions, one of the DPS legendaries for Brewmasters of this expansion. The finishing touch, which I enjoyed as an ability, was the Zen Med, which gets an extra. Zen Meditation has a 25% reduced cooldown and is no longer cancelled when you move or when you are hit by melee attacks, which means that as long as you're not casting something yourself, you can get 60% damage reduction for a series of abilities or a series of attacks from big packs in Mythic Plus. So 60% is a lot of damage reduction, so it might come quite in handy in terms of tankiness for Brewmaster. As I said, overall, this is perhaps one of the most complete of the talent trees that we have seen so far, one of the more ready to go already type of talent setups for Monk. It looks very, very nice. Where people were a little bit more on edge, however, wasn't Brewmaster. It was more about Mistweaver and about Windwalker. No, let's leave Mistweaver for last, because Windwalker, at the very least, is still very meta in Mythic Plus. It's not really as abandoned as Mistweaver, if we have to be honest. There are plenty of good things in here for Windwalker as well. One of the coolest things you notice immediately is the number of red circles you see. That red circle you might recognize as the icon for Touch of Death. If we go back to the general tree, there are also 2 circles for Touch of Death. So you have your Touch of Death baseline ability of cooldown 3 minutes. You can bring it down to a 120-second cooldown reduction, so you can bring it down to a 1-minute cooldown of Touch of Death. You can also buff it by making it use on even higher HP to deal 35% of your max health, and then when you go Windwalker, you gain this one right here. When you combo strike, the cooldown of Touch of Death is reduced. Touch of Death deals an additional flat damage, and then Hidden Master's Forbidden Touch. Touch of Death deals 40% increased damage and can be used a second time within 5 seconds before its cooldown is triggered. So this is like a Torghast power, yeah? I think, I'm pretty sure. And lastly, this one, Fatal Flying Guillotine. Touch of Death strikes up to 4 additional nearby enemy targets. So 5 targets in total, and you can use it twice on a 1-minute cooldown. This looks like a massive burst of damage, as if Windwalker Monk needed more AoE burst damage. With these 3 points in here, you can basically use double Touch of Death on 5 enemies each time in Mythic Plus packs, for example, which looks incredibly powerful. We already touched on the Covenants. You have the Bone Dust Brew and the Feline Stomps. The offers here are different as opposed to the offers of Brewmaster, where you get choice nodes after the 2 abilities for the legendaries. Instead here, the Bone Dust Brew gets attenuation as a side choice, or calculated strikes, which is also one of your conduits, but now you can take both of them, you don't have to choose. Same goes for Feline Stomp. You get Way of the Fae, your conduit ability, and then you get Last Emperor's Capacitor, which is one of the meme legendaries of Monk to increase the damage of your Crackling Jade Lightning. What looks pretty cool of Monk is the amount of, let's just say, legendaries plus conduit abilities plus even Torghast powers that you get by the end of the block in here. Because on top of Feline Stomp and its conduits or Covenant legendaries, as well as Bone Dust Brew, you also get Kiefer's Skyreach to significantly empower your Tiger's Palm and give you an on-demand 50% more crit chance for 6 seconds every minute. You also get Invoker's Delight, one of your current most taken, most used legendaries for Monk, that can also be now taken in here. Of course, Whirling Dragon Punch is here. Perhaps the biggest news is that if we go in here back to Windwalker, Whirling Dragon Punch has been since forever as a choice between Spiritual Focus and Serenity, which it meant you never took them because you had to take Whirling Dragon Punch. Now, however, with Whirling Dragon Punch on his own, it means the choice is now between Storm, Earth and Fire and Serenity, while at the same time, Spiritual Focus is on its own, which means that now you can take Spiritual Focus and Whirling Dragon Punch at the same time. This is one of the major news of Monk. Rest of your stuff is still here. You have your Invoke Zhuen with the Empowered Tiger Lightning and the Zhuen's Bond Conduit all together for you to take. Fury of Zhuen is also there to further buff your Zhuen cooldown. As a new thing for Windwalker, you do get your returning legendary ability for Legion Strike of the Windlord right there. Okay, one of the minor pet peeves I have about this tree is that Jade Ignition is here. Jade Ignition is your quite powerful legendary for AoE burst damage that is right in here. The confusing thing about Jade Ignition is that all of your other AoE stuff is down this path. As you can see by the icons, there's your Spinning Crane Kick icon, there is more Spinning Crane Kick icon, and there is more Spinning Crane Kick icon, all for damage increase. There is also more AoE down this road because you have even more radius of Spinning Crane Kick. You have Rushing Jade Wind for more AoE. You also have the whole Bone Dust Brew AoE down here. So all of this is AoE, and then Jade Ignition is all the way down here. So that's the only minor annoyance for the Windwalker tree. But the rest of the tree looks very nice. You do have, as mentioned, from the general tree, more defensive options. You can still, of course, take your Touch of Karma. You have plenty of other returning things that you can now take at the same time. Several power-ups from Touch of Death. Plus, you can take Bone Dust Brew and Feline Stomp at the same time. You can take Kiefer's Skyreach plus Invoker's Delight at the same time. There are plenty of new things for Windwalker to be excited about. Now, we left Mistweaver for last. Now, don't be too discouraged. I haven't left it for last because it's completely garbage. There is one issue. So the issue is that as a downside, let's just start with that. Mistweaver doesn't really get any major important cooldowns that you might expect them to be needed for or to be wanted for in the raid. They don't get a major buff for the raid, or they don't get a major cooldown for the raid. Of course, monks still have their debuff, their physical damage debuff they can put on enemies, but that is something, and I'm sure Mistweavers have learned, is something that is usually being taken by Brewmaster monks in your raid, which means you don't need a Mistweaver monk for the debuff. So what's left to be used in the raid for Mistweaver is not coming in Dragonflight. There is no new major thing that you might expect a monk to be taken for in the raid, or even in Mythic Plus. There is nothing really like cool or shiny or new in that regard. There are still quite a few improvements on the Mistweaver tree, especially in the options. Once we go back to Mistweaver, you will see, for example, that you will be able to take, on top of all these three combined, you will also be able to take Summon Jade Serpent Statue plus Refreshing Jadewind plus Invoke Chiji at the same time. You will be able to take one of these two between Upwelling and Focus Standard together with Rising Mist at the same time. So you do have way more options to pair up your currently existing talents and empowerments. You do have, for example, your Teachings of the Monastery, which you can then pair up with Ancient Teachings of the Monastery and then pair up with Rising Mist. You do have options for more damage, however, especially this thing right here, Zen Pulse. Trigger a Zen Pulse around an ally to deal spell power damage to all enemies within 8 yards of the target. And then you can further empower it between the choice of triggering a second time at 30% effectiveness or flat out increasing the healing and damage it deals by 10%. So at the very least, it's an extra ability to do damage in Mythic Plus, for example, not to mention as a Mistweaver, which for a long time used to play Ventir. Now you have the option to go for Feline Stomp, which is also more damage in Mythic Plus. You have the option to go for Bondas Brew, which is also more damage in Mythic Plus. Much like the other monks, you can also go and take Invoker's Delight for haste, for more damage. Plenty of your healing abilities can be synergized together. You can take Uplifted Spirits, again, for your fist weaving and damaging, increasing the healing as well. You have the choice between your current ability plus your talents, Yulon or Chiji, and then there is a whole bunch of improvements. You can take Enveloping Breath together with Yulon's Whisper, together with Refreshing Jadewind, together with Peaceful Mending, finishing off on the other side with something like Upwelling. There are plenty of cool things for Monk. As I said, it feels kind of bad because you know that when you go in the raid, you kind of want something that is very powerful that you might be wanted for, whether it's a Spirit Link, or it's a barrier, or it's a ramp, or like a Spirit Shell, or currently for Holy Priest it would be Symbol of Hope, you know, something like that. And Monk definitely doesn't have that right now. Even with all these news and talents, there isn't really any new major cooldown for you that would make you super wanted. Of course, in Dragonflight you might get the Resto Druid treatment of Season 3, where maybe you get so much HPS, right? Maybe you get, with this whole setup, you get to be healing for so much that you become one of the more standard healers because of your very heavy healing that you can do. Maybe that could be your only saving grace. But when it comes to cooldowns, when it comes to super special things that might make you want very wanted, there isn't really too much in here. It is, as I said, unquestionably better in Mythic Plus. You have gotten more ways to do damage. As I said, once you go back into the general tree, you can also go and pick up things like damage increase for your Rising Sun Kick, or extra damage for your Touch of Death, or extra damage if you go down the Windwalker tree. So you can do more damage. You can also get tankier in Mythic Plus because you can take multiple defensives at once. You have, as I said, extra damage from Zen Pulse, extra damage by being able to take both Feline Stomp and Bondas Brew at the same time. So at the very least, if the raid doesn't look that revolutionary for Mistweaver, you do have definitely more ways to do damage in Mythic Plus. And remember, just to try to give a little bit more hope to Mistweavers, that you are one of the few specs that does damage by default. So just like Holy Paladin and just like Discipline Priest, your damage was the default in your rotation. Other specs that became more popular than you in Mythic Plus got to do that damage via borrowed powers that they have completely lost in Dragonflight. Shamans no longer have Deep Tremor Stone Legendary, they no longer have Raging Vesper Vortex Legendary and the Vesper Totem Covenant ability. Priests no longer have Boon of the Ascended. So these specs have all lost their baseline damage. So at the moment, without even seeing them in game, you are the prime suspect, you are the candidate number one for doing the most damage in Mythic Plus, until we see new things, until we see more of the other specs and classes, or we see the numbers, the tuning, or even the tier sets, the bonus of the tier sets from the first raid of Dragonflight. But at the moment, your damage profile looks very good compared to other specs. You have plenty of options of damage as a Mistweaver in your talents. I will would finish, much like I did for Brewmaster, with a pet peeve for Mistweaver that I did not like. What I did not like was this one, was Life Cocoon, because with Life Cocoon, you have one talent over here, Mists of Life, and then you have one talent over here, Nourishing Chi, and then you have one talent over here, Calming Coalescence, which is 3 different talents to empower your Life Cocoon. 3. I think that's a little bit overkill for something like Life Cocoon. Life Cocoon is already fine as it is. You don't need to empower it even more. I think this could have been spent some better way, other than improving Life Cocoon even more. That's been my pet peeve when I saw this 3 for Mistweaver. Overall, as I said, likely the best looking 3, also considering the current situation of the specs, is for Brewmaster, because of how smooth and nice it looks, followed by Windwalker, because of you know, the sheer amount of options at the end, returning things and powerful things, legendaries, conduits, covenant abilities all together, plus the interesting setup with your Touch of Death, very interesting. And then lastly, Mistweaver. No real big raid cooldowns added, no real utility or like wanted buffs needed for the raid or for your party. The main positive for Mistweaver is the damage that you might be able to do in Mythic Plus. That is it for the moment. So this was the first reaction, the first look at the talents for Monk. I think it was overall, if we gauge by the initial fears and reactions of the player base waiting for the Monk talent trees, they are much better than I think they easily passed in quality many of the first iterations of talents of other classes. I think they easily pass Hunter in quality, they easily pass Priest, they pass Warrior, Paladin as well probably. So overall, I think they're definitely not a bad set of talents, especially now that you can also get them to be improved over time, now that they are out and they are already on a good path for being decent talents for Dragonflight. So with this being said, we are now done looking at these talents. Let me guys know, of course, what you guys think, especially Monk players, what you guys think of these talent trees for the 3 different specs of Monk. For the time being, I'm gonna leave you to the rest of your Friday, the start of this weekend according to some. Thank you, of course, as usual, to all of my patrons for supporting me. This is what allows me to continue to produce videos for WoW. Still here as the CEO and president of the No Alpha organization as usual. It is starting to get a little bit tedious, I'm not gonna lie. For the support, you can of course like and comment down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself, which is also kind of the goal when having a YouTube channel. And lastly, for further social media connections, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right down at these 2 links. Now that is all said and done, we can leave each other. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I knew it, Demon Hunter was going to be the last one to be shown. I don't even think Blizzard is actually able right now to fill an entire talent tree for any of the Demon Hunter specs.